Have you ever wondered why a man once drunk on your presence turns cold when you begin to need him less? Why his eyes, once fixated on you with hunger and admiration, avert themselves the moment you speak without trembling, stand without begging, leave without breaking? It is not love he feared, it was your sovereignty. There is a kind of woman who walks not in pursuit but in truth. She does not cling, she witnesses. She does not demand, she discerns. She does not ask to be chosen, because she has already chosen herself. And it is this woman, this rare embodiment of the emotionally sovereign feminine, who terrifies a man unready to meet her on sacred ground. She is not the storm, she is the stillness after it. And when she leaves, she does not scream. She simply stops explaining, stops hoping, stops waiting. There is no fury in her exit, only freedom. And for the man who once basked in her softness but feared the power beneath it, her silence becomes unbearable. It is not the sound of rejection that haunts him. It is the absence of chaos, the calm finality of a woman who no longer needs to be understood. Jung spoke of the anima, the feminine image buried within every man's unconscious mind. She is wild and warm, soft and elusive, seductive and spiritual. But when he has not integrated her, when his own feminine is fractured, he projects her onto the women he loves. He wants her, yes, but he wants her to be his mirror, not her own moon. He wants to be needed by her, not challenged. He wants her vulnerability without her strength, her softness without her boundaries, her body without her soul. So when a woman begins to heal, to rise, to remember who she is outside of his gaze, she activates a storm in him, not because she's doing harm, but because her presence shatters the illusion. She is not the anima dancing to his emotional script. She is the mirror to his incompletion. This is why he feared her all along, because she saw him. And worse, she saw herself too. Most women are trained to shrink for love, to soften their boundaries, to withhold truth, to chase the promise of emotional crumbs in the name of connection. But the emotionally sovereign woman no longer trades her dignity for closeness. She is kind but not accommodating. She is open but not available for confusion. She loves but not at the cost of her wholeness. And it is this refusal to betray herself that makes her unforgettable. When she walks away with grace, she does not leave as a victim. She leaves as a queen, not to punish, not to manipulate, but because the cost of staying is self-abandonment, and she has already died that death before. She has tasted the ache of begging for love with shaking hands. She has sacrificed her softness on the altar of male ego. She has dimmed her radiance so as not to intimidate, swallowed her words so as not to provoke, but not anymore. Now she chooses herself, not in bitterness, but in reverence. And he watches, helpless, as the woman he thought would orbit his wounds chooses to become the sun of her own universe. And only then does he realize she was not his possession, she was his mirror. And without her, he is blind. There is a unique agony that overtakes a man who loses a woman he never truly possessed, but one who once saw into him with clarity no other ever dared. He may posture in indifference, speak in detachment, even move on quickly to distract himself with the noise of new affection. But beneath the surface, his unconscious is stirred. The archetype she awakened in him does not fade. It deepens. It festers, it confronts. In her departure, he feels what he could never articulate in her presence. Regret, not just for losing her, but for never having the courage to meet her fully, for never standing tall in his own emotional maturity, for never becoming the man her soul called out from him, and now in the quiet aftermath he drowns in the echo of her grace. You see, there is a sacred rage in the feminine, but it is her grace that breaks him, not the storm, but the calm, the kind of calm that says, I could have loved you through anything, but not through the loss of myself. This woman, this sovereign feminine, she doesn't weaponize her absence. She simply isn't there, not out of cruelty, but because the soul can only whisper in silence. And now, every moment without her is a confrontation with everything he never healed. every idle minute a haunting, not of her body but of what her presence revealed in him. He thought he feared abandonment, but what he really feared was accountability. Carl Jung knew this terrain well. He wrote of the shadow, the buried unconscious aspects of the self that we disown, suppress, or project. And in relationship, these shadows are not erased by love, they are activated by it. The sovereign woman becomes a spiritual detonator, not because she wounds, but because she refuses to carry his. She no longer mothers the emotional boy hidden beneath the man. She no longer makes excuses for his emotional absence or confusion. She no longer tolerates cycles of hope and harm. Her presence was the invitation to rise, her absence the cost of refusal. And this is what he regrets most, that she loved him enough to see him fully, but not enough to abandon herself in the process, that she didn't need to scream to prove a point. She simply disappeared from the role he cast her in. And now he sees her in everything. In the silence after a long day, in the laugh of a woman who reminds him of what he forfeited, in the eyes of someone new who offers attention but not depth, because the depth that belonged to her and it cannot be replicated. The emotionally sovereign woman becomes a living lesson in consequence, not as punishment, as presence. She teaches not with force but with clarity, the clarity of boundaries, the clarity of standards, the clarity of knowing that love without safety is a form of self-violence. And while she feels the ache of letting go, she does not betray herself to numb it. She chooses her own becoming. This kind of woman is not for the faint of heart. She is not for the man who wants comfort without growth. She is not for the one who confuses control with commitment. She is not for the man who still needs a woman to shrink so that he can feel tall. She is for the man who has met his own shadow and didn't flinch. The man who knows that love is not possession, that closeness is not control, that the feminine is not his to manage, but to witness, to honor, to stand beside with reverence, not fear. And if he cannot offer that, she will go, not with bitterness, but with wisdom, not with fire, but with light. Because walking away is not always a sign of anger. Sometimes it is a sacred act of emotional clarity. The knowing that staying would require self-erasure, that silence would become complicity, that her softness would soon turn to resentment. So she leaves before she forgets who she is. And in doing so, she remembers everything. Her absence becomes a mirror, a wound, a reckoning. The kind of loss that doesn't scream, but lingers. Not in guilt, but in truth. And when he is alone with his thoughts, he won't remember the arguments. He'll remember her eyes, the way they softened when she believed in him, the way they hardened when she no longer could. He feared her because she was whole, and he regrets her because she never broke. And now he wanders through women like a ghost seeking warmth he once took for granted. Hey touch his body, but not his depth. They echo affection, but not recognition. He smiles, he charms, he continues his life. But beneath it all, he knows they do not see him the way she did. Because when a woman is emotionally sovereign, she loves with vision. She doesn't just see who a man is. She sees who he could become. She holds space for his greatness, not by fixing him, but by believing in what he refuses to claim. She does not love the image. She loves the potential. And that is why her absence burns more than her presence ever could. For it was in her gaze that he caught a glimpse of his higher self. It was in her unwavering truth that he saw a version of himself uncloaked. Not the man he presented to the world, but the man buried beneath the defenses, the pride, the wounds, and now with her gone, the reflection vanishes. There is no mirror more honest than the one she held up, and no silence more deafening than when she sets it down. You may not realize this, but when you walk away in your power, without rage, without drama, without chasing closure. He feels it in his bones, not because you withheld love, but because you honored it, and by honoring it, you withdrew it from where it was no longer met. A man can survive distance, he can survive absence. What he cannot survive is the haunting of untouched truth, the knowing that he was given something rare and returned it with fear. He may not speak it, he may pretend it doesn't matter, he may build a life so loud you would think he's forgotten, but deep in the chambers of his psyche, the sovereign feminine has marked him, because in Jungian terms, she has activated the anima, the unconscious feminine within him. She became not just a woman, but a symbol of all he's yet to integrate. Her departure was not just heartbreak, it was initiation. And this is why her walking away becomes sacred, because it's not abandonment, it's a return to the self. In the quiet space where she used to soften him, he now meets the cold presence of his own avoidance. Where she once brought reflection, there is now the shadow unfiltered, raw, exposed, undeniable. Do you know what makes a man spiral after a sovereign woman leaves? Not the loneliness, not the inconvenience, but the confrontation. Because when she leaves, she takes with her the shield he used to deflect his own healing, and suddenly he is naked before his wounds with no one left to blame. She no longer cushions the blow of his choices, she no longer dances around his unspoken fears, she no longer pretends confusion when he plays small. She knows too much to pretend anymore. And there's something deeply threatening about a woman who cannot be manipulated by hope. That's what emotional sovereignty is. It's not arrogance, it's not detachment, it's not bitterness. It's the quiet power of a woman who no longer needs to be chosen to feel worthy. She does not beg for understanding. She does not demand apology. She does not campaign for closure, because she is her own closure. And this terrifies him, because for the first time, he is not the one walking away. He is not the one in control. He is not the one who gets to say, she needed too much, or she was too emotional, or she overreacted. No, this time he must face the unbearable truth. She left not because she was too much, but because he gave too little, and the sovereign feminine never asks twice. He will try to forget her. He will distract himself. He will convince others, and himself, that she was just another chapter. But the soul knows, the body remembers. The psyche never lies. He didn't lose her love. He lost access to the version of himself that only existed in her presence, because she saw him in a way no one else could, and loved him in a way he didn't know how to receive, and walked away in a way he will never forget. Regret is not always loud. Sometimes it's the subtle silence between distractions, the way his fingers hesitate when dialing a number, the sudden ache when a familiar scent drifts through the air, the quiet chaos in his chest when someone mentions her name. Regret, for a man who once stood in the presence of a sovereign woman, is not theatrical. It is sacred suffering, a private reckoning. And this reckoning does not come because she tried to punish him. No, that would mean she still needed him to feel her pain. But emotional sovereignty means she doesn't. She doesn't weaponize her absence. She simply honors her soul enough to leave the battlefield entirely. A man may survive a woman's anger. He may even withstand her tears, but he cannot survive her indifference, not when it is born from awakening. Because something shifts the moment she realizes her worth is not up for negotiation. That love does not mean tolerating confusion. That tenderness should not require translation. That intimacy, in its truest form, is clarity, not chaos. And so she stops asking him to rise. She stops waiting for him to meet her halfway. She stops dimming her wisdom to protect his ego. She stops because she remembers. She remembers that she is the storm and the stillness, the muse and the mirror, the lesson and the liberation. And wise, he searches for her in others, in the curve of a smile, in the echo of a laugh, in the warmth of a gaze. He will keep finding shadows, reflections, not presence, repeats, not rebirth. Because the sovereign woman doesn't just leave, she evolves. And when she evolves, she becomes unreachable to the man who stayed behind. He can't follow her, not because she's hiding, but because she is now vibrating at a frequency his unintegrated soul cannot hold. That is the part he doesn't understand. It wasn't just distance, it was depth. When she walked away with grace, she didn't just leave him. She left the version of herself that once tolerated his half-love. She shed the skin that once sought his validation. She buried the illusion that he would ever rise if she just loved him harder. And that burial was her rebirth. This is the beauty and the terror of feminine individuation, the path that leads a woman out of relational dependency and into soulful sovereignty. It is the moment she stops trying to be understood and starts trying to understand herself. The man who once felt safe in her confusion now finds himself lost in her clarity. The man who thrived on her emotional labor now drowns in her silence. The man who mistook her softness for neediness now trembles before her serenity. And if you've ever wondered why he seems to spiral after you've detached, why he chases once you've walked away, understand this. It's not just about losing you, it's about losing the version of himself that only existed in your presence. You were not his possession. You were his portal, a bridge between who he was and who he could have been. But he refused the journey. He rejected the discomfort. He feared the transformation. And now he mourns not just your absence, but his own arrested becoming. That is what Jung meant when he spoke of the unintegrated shadow, the parts of us we refuse to see until they're reflected in someone who walks away. She was not his enemy, she was his mirror, and mirrors break when they're not honored. Yet still, in his dreams, she appears, not to haunt, but to remind, not to seduce, but to awaken, not to punish, but to echo the truth. You could have met me here. But he didn't, and she no longer waits. Because the sovereign woman is not a chapter in his redemption arc. She is a universe he was invited into, once. And once was enough. And now the world sees her differently, but not nearly as differently as she sees herself. Gone is the girl who once waited for love to arrive with flowers in one hand and apologies in the other. Gone is the woman who bent her backbone into bridges just so someone else could feel taller. She no longer shapeshifts to be palatable. She no longer softens her truth to protect someone's ego. She no longer bleeds to feed brokenness. What she has become cannot be held by hands that tremble at the weight of authenticity, because emotional sovereignty is not just self-protection, it is sacred embodiment. It is the unshakable knowing that you are your own source, that no man, no promise, no apology holds the keys to your worth. He fears her, not because she is cruel, but because she is free, and freedom terrifies the man who cannot yet face himself. He is not haunted by what she said, but by what she never needed to say. That quiet exit, that unannounced silence, that graceful disappearance that whispered, "I have nothing left to prove." To the unawakened man, love must be a tug of war, push and pull, win and lose, ego and validation. But she no longer plays. She does not fight for a seat at a table where she must starve to be seen. She builds her own. She sits with herself. And in that silence, she hears what love is supposed to sound like. Not survival, not confusion, but peace. The tragedy for him is that he mistook her strength for pride, her independence for coldness, her boundaries for punishment. He didn't know that her detachment wasn't anger, it was evolution. Because she no longer argues, she no longer explains, she no longer stays when her soul begins to shrink. And that stillness, that divine, unapologetic stillness, is where he finally meets himself, alone, confronted, unmasked. This is where the myth of masculine control begins to crumble, not through her rage, not through her chaos, but through her refusal to collapse, through her refusal to remain where her intuition whispers, "This is too small for you." You see, emotional sovereignty is a threat to every relationship rooted in control, because when a woman no longer needs to be chosen, she begins to choose, not out of fear, not out of longing, but out of alignment. And that kind of choosing is dangerous to the man who was only ever half awake. He doesn't miss her body. He misses the mirror she held up, the one that showed him what he could have become had he been willing to grow. And now, the absence of that mirror leaves him stumbling through the fog of his own avoidance. So he tells himself she was too much, too intense, too emotional, too independent. But what he really means is, she saw too much, too deep into his wounds, too clear through his masks, too wise for the version of himself he wasn't ready to outgrow. And now she walks through the world with that knowing in her chest, not bitter, not broken, but sovereign. He may try again, he may send the message, make the call, knock on the door of a version of her that no longer lives there. But what he doesn't understand is that the woman he once knew no longer exists. The one who stayed is gone. The one who waited is gone. The one who tried to convince him she was worthy, she is gone. In her place stands a woman reborn from the ashes of self-abandonment, a woman who walks not to be followed, but to be free. And when she passes him in his mind, in a memory, in a regret, in a moment of quiet desperation, she does not slow down, she does not turn back. She blesses him with the echo of everything he could not hold, and keeps walking. Because the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.